Hello there, seeker of silence, and welcome to this quiet refuge above the restless world, where old stories breathe softly and the long-forgotten dust of hidden archives settles like gentle snow upon shelves of memory. If these quiet tales bring you peace and help guide your thoughts toward calmer paths, feel free to subscribe so that our small fellowship of dreamers may continue to grow, each of us sharing in the hush of lore told slowly, like rain sliding down old stone in the patient hours of the night. For now, let the world beyond your room grow distant and dim as the soft rain drifts through Gotham's wandering winds, falling in silver threads across rooftops and gathering in quiet pools along the trembling edges of the clock tower's ancient frame. It is here, high above the city's sleepless murmur, that my story begins. The clock tower of Gotham has always been a lonely sentinel, its stones darkened by decades of rain and soot, its gears murmuring with the slow, familiar rhythm of a heart that refuses to forget time's passing. I have tended its library for longer than anyone remembers. Some say I arrived when the tower itself was still young, when its bells rang truer and its lanterns glowed with the innocence of new brass. Others say I simply appeared one night, as though carried by the wind, drawn to the hush of old parchment the way a moth is drawn to firelight. In truth, I came because this place needed me. Its scrolls, its brittle maps, its records of forgotten reigns and long, quiet voices. A city like Gotham remembers everything, but rarely speaks of it. Someone must be the keeper of those memories, and so I remain, quill in hand, cataloguing the slow drift of history. Tonight, as the hour slips past midnight, I sit at my oaken desk, the one nestled beneath the circular window that gazes out over the storm-dressed city. Rain whispers against the glass in long, deliberate strokes, each droplet stretching into silence before falling into the next. I dip my quill into a small well of ink, and the soft scritch of its tip against the parchment mingles with the gentle chime of the tower's gears. It is a soothing music, the hymn of the night shift archivist. Stacks of old files lie open before me, their edges curled like tired leaves. Many come from ages of Gotham that most would rather forget, but I find comfort in their worn scent. A fragrance of dust and cedarwood, of long-sealed corridors and rain-soaked timbers. A lantern to my right burns low, its flame swaying just enough to cast moving shadows over the brass mechanisms behind me. Beyond those gears, I can hear the faint rumble of thunder rolling far beyond the narrows, muffled by distance and the thick stone bones of the tower. The city breathes deeply tonight, its rooftops shimmering with rain, its alleys humming with quiet secrets. And here in this calm refuge above Gotham, I continue my quiet work. Page after page, I catalogue events that once shook the city, but now rest gently beneath my fingertips. Here, a record of a long-forgotten mayor whose speeches echoed in empty halls. There, a torn blueprint of the first elevated rail, its edges brown with time, and scattered between these, letters from citizens whose names have long faded from the stones they walked upon. I am alone but never lonely. The archives speak in their own way. Soft sighs of parchment shifting, the patient creak of shelves settling, the distant tick of the great gears turning overhead. Tonight should have been like any other. A quiet shift, a calm storm. The company of old books and the warmth of the small coal brazier at my feet. I had intended to finish the cataloguing of the tower's oldest manuscripts, those written when Gotham was more forest than city, and its nights were lit only by lantern glow and the silver drift of stars. But then, a presence stirred the air. It was subtle at first, a faint shift in the tower's breath, as though a shadow had passed between one heartbeat and the next. The lantern's flame trembled, leaning ever so slightly to one side. The rain against the window seemed to hush itself, as though listening. I paused, quill hovering above the parchment, the ink gathering at its tip like a question waiting for an answer. Footsteps did not sound in the usual way, for the visitor who entered was more shadow than man, and the tower itself seemed reluctant to reveal his approach. But I felt him, a presence as steady as the night, as calm as the storm's distant growl. Slowly I lifted my gaze from the page. There, emerging from the dim corridor between the archives and the old stairwell, stood a figure shaped from darkness and rain, his cloak trailing droplets that shimmered in the lantern's golden breath. The Batman had come to the library, and for the first time in many years, the quiet rhythm of my night shifted gently, like a page turning in a book I thought I had already read. He stood still for a moment, as though letting the shadows settle around him, his cowl tilted just slightly as he took in the shelves, the lanterns, the sea of parchment that filled the room with ancient scent. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, roughened by storm and solitude, yet it carried a quiet respect for the hush of the archives. "I need your help," he said. The rain deepened against the glass, and my old quill rested gently upon the page as the night leaned a little closer around us. The words lingered in the air with the softness of settling dust, and for a long, quiet heartbeat, I simply let them rest there, warming the dim chamber like the glow of a newly tended ember. Batman seldom speaks without purpose. His voice carries the weight of rain-soaked rooftops and long, sleepless hours, yet tonight there was something gentler woven into its tone, a calm beneath the gravel, as though the storm outside had left part of its stillness within him. I set the quill aside, its feather drooping slightly as though relieved for the pause, and folded my hands upon the desk. The parchment before me held half-finished notes, ink glistening faintly in the lantern light, like starlight trapped upon old snow. "Of course," I said softly, letting my voice move with the slow rhythm of the tower's turning gears. "What brings you here at this hour?" Batman stepped further into the chamber, his boots whispering against the stone floor in a surprisingly gentle cadence. Every movement of his cloak carried the subtle perfume of wet leather and cold night air, mingling with the warm scents of parchment, cedar shelves, and the faint musk of old maps rolled tightly in their cubbies. He approached the circular window, where rain traced long silver lines down the glass, and stood with his back to me for a moment, a silhouette carved from shadow and quiet resolve. Gotham stretched far below us, its lights shimmering through the storm like candles trembling in the wind. The city's breath rose in soft waves, a mixture of fog, steam, and the distant hum of late-night wanderers seeking shelter beneath awnings and fire escapes. "The tower keeps records," he said finally, "older than the city recognizes, older than the departments that claim to maintain them." His gaze remained fixed on the rain, watching as distant lightning pulsed behind the low clouds, illuminating the rooftops in gentle, muted flashes. "I'm looking for something buried," he continued, "something forgotten, or perhaps deliberately hidden." A drop of water fell from his cloak, landing upon the stone with a soft patter that blended seamlessly with the rain's quiet music. I nodded slowly, the motion small, as though not to disturb the fragile balance of the moment. "Most truths worth finding," I murmured, "do not wish to be found quickly." Batman turned his head slightly, acknowledging the thought with a faint, almost imperceptible incline. There was no urgency in him tonight, no chase echoing through his breath, no tension rippling through his stance. Instead, he moved with the composure of a traveler seeking direction beneath an ancient sky. "What sort of record?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer to the shelves, letting his gloved fingers brush the wooden edges, never quite touching the brittle spines resting upon them. Dust motes stirred at his proximity, rising into the lantern glow like tiny flecks of golden snow. A ledger, he said after a long pause, or a journal, something kept by those who built this tower, or by those who kept watch here before your time. A quiet creak echoed from a distant corner of the library, as though the tower itself shifted thoughtfully at his words. I have seen many years, I replied gently, but even I do not reach that far back. Still, the archives remember. They always do. Batman's presence settled beside me, a calm, steady stillness, like a great stone placed to anchor a drifting bridge. Show me where the earliest archives begin, he said. Not an order, a request softened by the night, by the rain, and perhaps by the comfort of this quiet refuge where the city's cries could not reach us. I rose slowly, my joints murmuring like old hinges, and retrieved a thin iron key from a drawer beneath my desk. The metal was cool to the touch, its weight familiar, its shape worn smooth from countless moments just like this one. As we walked deeper into the library, the tall shelves rose around us like ancient trees, their branches heavy with scrolls and leather-bound tomes. The lantern light followed us in trembling waves, casting our shadows like wandering spirits across the stone floor. Batman walked with a quiet reverence, his footsteps softened by the thick carpet runners that lined the corridor. He glanced occasionally at the towering shelves, noticing every detail, the faded labels, the runic symbols etched long ago by unknown hands, the soft glimmer of iron clasps embracing forgotten manuscripts. The clock tower's deepest archives lay behind a narrow arched door made of old walnut wood, darkened by time and polished by the passing of many hands. I inserted the key, and the lock yielded with a gentle sigh. A cool breath of air drifted outward, carrying the scent of ancient parchment and stone kept in shadow for far too long. These records, I whispered, pulling the lantern closer to soften the darkness, have not been disturbed in many decades. Batman stood beside me, his silhouette steady against the glow, and together we stepped into the quiet heart of Gotham's forgotten memory. Behind us the rain deepened, as though offering its blessing for whatever secrets were about to awaken, slowly, softly, like pages turning in a book that had waited far too long to be read. The lantern's glow drifted ahead of us in gentle, wavering circles, spilling light across stone pillars that had stood in silence long before my own hands first brushed their edges. The air within the archive held a cool, earthy stillness, the kind that settles only in places untouched by hurried footsteps. It smelled of time itself, of parchment grown soft with age, of ink that had surrendered to the slow embrace of dust, of wood bowed slightly under the weight of memory. Batman paused at the threshold, his gaze traveling upward along the tall shelves that stretched into the dimness above. His presence changed subtly here. The sharpness of the vigilante softened, replaced by something reflective, almost reverent. "It's quieter than I expected," he murmured, his voice low enough that it blended with the hush of the tower's old stones. I smiled faintly. "The oldest rooms often learn to quiet themselves," I said. "They keep their stories better that way." We stepped deeper inside. The lantern's flame flickered gently as a draught of cool air wandered through the chamber, carrying the faint scent of moss hidden between the stones, and the distant murmur of Gotham's storm rolling across the rooftops far below. Each footstep felt softened, muffled by the dust-laden carpets and the weight of history that pressed tenderly around us. Batman moved closer to a tall shelf, its wood darkened with age, its labels written in an elegant script, long replaced in modern record-keeping. He reached out, his gloved fingers tracing the curve of an iron clasp that held a thick ledger shut. The touch was feather-light, yet respectful, as though he feared that the book might crumble under the wrong kind of care. "These records were kept by the tower's earliest caretakers," I said softly, lifting the lantern so its glow embraced the shelf. Watchmen and archivists, tasked with guarding the city's memory long before Gotham grew into the sprawling labyrinth you know today. Batman nodded slowly, absorbing the words with the same quiet patience one might bring to the reading of forgotten scripture. A soft clinking echoed overhead. Somewhere in the tower's upper gears, rainwater tapped rhythmically against the metal housing, a lullaby carried down through the ancient pipes. Batman tilted his head, listening, not with suspicion, but with the contemplative stillness of someone who had spent most of his life conversing with storms. "They've always sounded different from inside the tower," he said quietly. I hummed in agreement. "The rain finds its own language here. Some say the stones remember how to sing with it." We moved along the shelves, passing scrolls wrapped in faded ribbons, maps too brittle to unfurl, and journals sealed with wax-bearing insignias long since abandoned. At last we stopped before a narrow alcove cut directly into the stone wall. Within it rested a few small tomes, each bound in rough leather the color of coffee grounds. Their spines bore marks that were neither numbers nor titles, but symbols, simple, unchanged through centuries. Batman leaned closer. "These are older than the tower itself." "Older than the current tower," I corrected gently. "There have been several versions, foundations built atop foundations, walls woven around remnants of what came before." He lifted one of the tomes, cradling it with a careful grip. The leather creaked in his hands, its fibers shifting like tired bones roused after a long slumber. He brought it to the table situated near the alcove, and the sound of the book settling upon the wood was soft as a turning page. I placed the lantern beside it, letting its glow spill across the embossed symbols on the cover. Batman did not rush to open it. Instead, he rested his fingertips lightly upon the spine, as though attuning himself to the quiet pulse of history held within. "Why were these hidden back here?" he asked after a pause. "Not hidden," I said with a gentle smile. "Merely fatty waiting. Some knowledge reveals itself only to those who come seeking with calm intent." The storm outside deepened, its steady murmurs threading through the hollow spaces of the tower. The gentle pattering of rain against the windowed alcoves sounded almost like distant applause. Batman exhaled slowly, a quiet, grounded sound. The cape around his shoulders shifted with the motion, releasing a faint scent of damp night air and cold stone. "Let's see what it has to say," he murmured. He opened the tome with deliberate care. The pages within were thick and uneven, their surfaces textured with the grain of handmade parchment. Ink had faded to a deep brown, yet the lettering remained graceful, each stroke placed with contemplative precision. The first page held no date, no introduction, only a paragraph of writing that stretched softly across the page like mist drifting over an early morning river. Batman leaned closer, his breath quiet, his brow relaxed in a rare expression of calm curiosity. I watched the lantern light dance upon his features, drawing gentle highlights along the edge of his jaw, the curve of his cowl, the thoughtful crease between his brows. He read the words once soundlessly, then again with a deeper stillness. "What does it say?" I asked, though my voice was soft enough not to break the moment. He looked up, eyes thoughtful, voice carrying a quiet weight. "It speaks of a keeper," he said, "a guardian of the city's memory, someone who served within these walls long before Gotham became what it is now." His gaze drifted back to the page, and he continued in a near whisper. "It says the tower was built not only for timekeeping, but for watching, listening, and protecting the stories that hold the city together." The rain outside pressed gently against the glass, a soft, patient rhythm that matched the calm stirring within the chamber. And as the lantern flickered, as the storm sang its quiet song through the gears and corridors of the tower, We leaned over the ancient tome, Batman and an old archivist, two figures lost in the warm hush of forgotten memory. The lantern's flame steadied itself as though settling in to listen, casting a warm golden hush across the open pages of the tome. Outside, the storm continued its gentle descent upon Gotham, the rain tapping softly against the tower's stone ribs, each droplet contributing to a melody older than the city itself. Batman traced a single line of text with the gloved tip of his finger, though he never truly touched the parchment. "I've seen references," he murmured, "to someone who kept watch from above long before the first recorded constable. But most records, they treat it like myth." I breathed in the earthy fragrance of the archive chamber, a blend of old leather, warm dust, and the faint sweetness of cedar shelves slowly releasing the memories they had held for generations. "Most truths," I said gently, "begin as myths, because no one knows how to name them yet." Batman's eyes softened, catching the lantern's glow like embers buried in the night. He turned the page. The parchment shifted with a soft, whispering rasp, its edges feathered with the touch of countless years. Ink curled across the next sheet in winding lines, the script elegant and deliberate, each letter forming as though shaped by the slow patience of the tower itself. The entry upon this page described the early days of Gotham's foundation, before the wide avenues, before the steel bridges, before the sprawl of lights that now shimmered across the horizon. It spoke of a smaller settlement huddled close to the river, where fog drifted through narrow streets like wandering spirits seeking warmth. Back then, before the first mayor was elected and the first precinct built, the tower had been no more than a simple watch post constructed by stonemasons whose names had long been forgotten. They built it high so they could listen to the winds that carried warnings and watch the flicker of lanterns moving along the river's edge. "The Keeper," Batman murmured again, reading the word written in faded but unmistakable strokes. I leaned closer, letting the lantern rest beside the book. The flame swayed gently, casting soft shadows that murmured along the page. The Keeper was not a title, I explained slowly, but a role, one chosen rather than assigned. Batman lifted his gaze toward me, curiosity resting quietly behind his eyes. Not sharp, not demanding, but contemplative, like a man listening for the distant echo of a memory. "The entry goes on," he said, turning the book slightly so the glow illuminated it more clearly. "It says the Keeper watched over Gotham from this very tower, that he walked the halls at night to ensure nothing within these walls was forgotten." A thoughtful silence settled between us, thickened by the soft patter of rain and the muted groan of the tower's old wooden beams. "Perhaps he still walks here," I said gently, in the echoes of footsteps too old to remember, yet too patient to fade. Batman's lips curved, barely noticeable, yet present enough to soften the air. "Not a ghost," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but a legacy." I nodded, feeling a warmth rise in my chest like the comfort of an old hearth rekindled after a long day. Batman leaned over the tome once more and turned another page. The parchment fluttered softly, sending a faint breeze that stirred the dust motes floating lazily in the lantern's glow. This page held sketches, hand-drawn diagrams of the tower's internal structure. Curving stairwells, hollowed columns, and a network of narrow passages indicated only by faint lines along the margins. Batman's eyes narrowed with gentle focus. "These aren't part of the current blueprints." "No," I replied. "The original architects preferred to work in layers, one tower nested within another, each foundation preserving pieces of the one before it." He traced a finger along a shaded corridor in the drawing. "A hidden passage." "Not hidden," I corrected softly, "merely overlooked. Most who come here do so seeking answers in plain sight. Few pause long enough to notice the answers that whisper from the shadows. Another page turned. This one revealed an almost poetic description of the tower's construction, how the stones were carried up the hill during the cold months, how the gears were forged in small workshops by candlelight, and how the keeper would often be seen standing at the highest window, listening to the wind before the builders began each day. Batman breathed in, slow and steady, as though absorbing the quiet rhythm of the past. The storm outside deepened its hymn into the body of the tower, vibrating through the brass pipes that ran along the walls. A low, melodic hum emerged, like distant chimes swaying in mist. For a long moment, we simply listened. To the storm, to the tower, to the soft, patient turning of pages that had lain still for countless years. Batman finally spoke, his tone low, tempered with warmth. These archives hold more than forgotten history. I smiled. They hold the city's breath. And the breath of all who have cared for it. Another page turned, revealing an entry that had been written in hurried strokes, the ink darker, the lines uneven, as though the writer had penned the words during a restless night. Batman leaned in. What does this one say? I drew the lantern closer, letting its glow settle upon the page's worn surface. It speaks, I murmured, of a night when the keeper received a visitor. Batman's eyes lifted slightly, shadowed by quiet reflection. A visitor? I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment deepen. It was written as you can see in the middle of a storm. The tower groaned softly, as though remembering that very night. Outside, the rain intensified for a heartbeat, then softened again into a gentle pattering. Batman breathed out slowly, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me more. Batman leaned subtly closer, his shadow merging with the soft lantern glow, as the old page before us revealed its uneven lines. The handwriting hurried, yet shaped with the restrained discipline of someone accustomed to careful record-keeping. The ink had spread slightly across the porous parchment, as if the quill tip had trembled with the weight of the moment, and the faint scent of old iron gall rose gently as the lantern warmed the page. Outside, the storm shifted, its rhythm deepening into a soft, rolling murmur that wrapped around the stone tower like a great, patient tide. I traced one finger just above the jagged strokes on the parchment, letting my eyes move slowly, softly, along the lines. The keeper writes, I murmured in a tone barely above the rustling air, that a visitor arrived well past the turning of midnight, a figure wrapped in shadow and rain-soaked silence, who entered not through the great door, but through an upper window where the wind likes to wander. Batman said nothing, but I could feel his attention sharpen, not tensely, only with the steady concentration of someone listening to the rain on a night much like this one. The keeper notes, I continued, that he did not startle, for the tower had warned him with a subtle shift in its breath. He felt the presence before he ever saw it. A faint hum escaped the gears above us, a mechanical sigh that echoed softly down the stone ribs of the tower. Batman exhaled through his nose, a quiet, grounding sound. It wasn't me, he said gently. This was long before. I know, I replied with a smile. But the resemblance is striking, isn't it? His silence was neither denial nor agreement, simply contemplation. I pulled the lantern closer, and the page brightened, illuminating the words with a soft amber glow. The keeper describes, I went on, a man cloaked in darkness, not as a threat, but as someone shaped by solitude. His steps were careful, but carried a depth of purpose. Batman's gaze lowered, reading alongside me, his expression gentled by the steady lantern light. And when he spoke, I whispered, he asked for guidance. Batman looked up, his brow softening. Guidance, he echoed quietly. Yes, I said. Not help. Guidance. A subtle difference. The storm outside gave a low, distant rumble, not thunder, but the soft shifting of heavy clouds brushing against the spires of Gotham. I turned the page, and the sound, that soft, feathery rasp, seemed to deepen the hush between us. The next entry was shorter, almost minimalist. As though the keeper had chosen each word as carefully as a watchmaker, placing gears within a delicate mechanism. It says, I read aloud, that the visitor asked for the truth about Gotham's beginnings, that he wished to understand the burdens he carried, because the city whispered to him in too many voices. Batman's breath shifted subtly beside me, and for a moment I felt the weight that must often rest upon the vigilante's shoulders, not of fear, but of deep, unspoken responsibility. The keeper had felt it too, it seemed, for the final line on the page read, "To carry Gotham is to carry her silence and her storm alike." Batman's hand rested lightly on the edge of the tome, his glove brushing the parchment with a touch so careful it almost resembled reverence. "Who was he?" Batman asked quietly, not expecting an answer, but offering the question as one might offer a stone to the surface of a still lake. "We do not know," I said gently. "No name appears. Only the imprint of a man standing between worlds, shadow and light, silence and burden." The storm grew calmer, its pattering softening into long, delicate threads of rain that traced the tower's windows with a soothing, rhythmic tenderness. Batman studied the page again, his silhouette unmoving, his presence steady and grounded. "What happened next?" he asked finally. I smiled softly, my fingertips brushing the page's edge before I turned it with slow, deliberate care. "The keeper," I murmured, led the visitor deeper into the archives. Batman looked to me, a faint curiosity warming his gaze. "Just as I am doing now," I added quietly. We stood in a gentle stillness, our breaths mingling with the subtle fragrance of parchment and wood, our shadows resting among the shelves like old companions. I lifted the lantern, its flame swaying in a calm, golden arc. "Come," I said, my voice soft enough to blend with the whisper of the rain. "There is more to show you. More the tower remembers, even when the world forgets." Batman nodded once, a gesture of gratitude, unspoken, yet unmistakable, and together we walked deeper into the quiet heart of Gotham's oldest stories. The deeper passages of the clock tower rarely welcomed visitors, even during the busiest daylight hours. Yet tonight, as Batman and I descended into the quieter wing of the archive, the old stones seemed to accept our presence with a warm, hushed familiarity, like a room long forgotten that stirs gently at the return of familiar footsteps. The lantern's glow stretched before us in slow-moving tendrils of gold, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air, each one drifting with the same gentle rhythm as falling snow. The rain outside softened again, its cadence moving from steady patter to a muted silvery hush, as though the storm had curled itself against the tower's side and fallen into a contemplative rest. Batman's footsteps remained quiet, though they echoed faintly in the high-vaulted corridor we entered. A long stone passage lined with narrow windows that overlooked the dark, fog-laced rooftops of Gotham. Behind the fog, the faintest glimmer of city lights shimmered like tired stars clinging to the edges of a restless sky. "This part of the tower," I whispered, "holds records too delicate for the main shelves. Some entries here were written by keepers who worked entirely in solitude. Men and women whose names appear nowhere else." Batman's eyes swept the corridor, absorbing every detail with unhurried care. The carvings along the pillars, the soft erosion at the base of the steps, The scent of ancient cedar carried faintly in the cool drafts. "What were they seeking?" he asked softly. "Understanding," I replied, "as all who serve Gotham eventually seek." He seemed to consider that with a quiet, inward nod. We reached a half-circular chamber at the end of the corridor, a room built directly beneath the great clock gears. Their slow, steady turning sang a muted lullaby overhead, each click and shift of the massive cogs blending into a soothing, rhythmic murmur. The chamber held only a few shelves, but each one bowed under the weight of meticulously organized scrolls tied with thin strips of cloth. I walked to a shelf near the center and brushed my fingers along the line of scrolls until I found the one I sought, a slender roll of parchment bound with dark blue fabric that had faded almost to gray. "This," I said softly, "is the Keeper's second account of the visitor." Batman's gaze sharpened, though his stance remained calm, as though he had expected the story to continue in just this way. I carried the scroll to a nearby wooden table and unrolled it carefully. Its parchment unfurled with the faintest sigh, still supple enough to move gracefully despite its age. Batman stood beside me, his presence quiet and solid. Not imposing, but grounding like a deep-rooted tree standing watch over a forest clearing. The writing upon the scroll was more fluid than in the earlier entry, as though the Keeper had written this account with clearer intent, or perhaps with a calmer hand. "Here," I began, letting my voice soften to match the atmosphere. "The Keeper describes guiding the visitor to the deepest alcove, a place where only the wind and the faint hum of the city could reach." Batman listened intently. His breathing was slow, even reflective. "The visitor asked," I continued, "if the city had always been broken." The lantern flickered. The gears above us shifted with a soft metallic groan, like the tower itself responding from somewhere deep within its bones. Batman lowered his gaze. His voice, barely more than a breath, escaped into the quiet. "A question people still ask." I nodded. But the Keeper answered differently than most would expect. Batman looked at me, curiosity subdued, yet unmistakably present. "He wrote," I said gently, "that the city was not broken, only young. A place still learning the shape of its own heart." A subtle warmth moved across Batman's expression, so faint it might have been imagined. Yet something in his posture loosened, just slightly. I let the moment breathe as the distant rain slid softly down the tower's walls and the gears overhead continued their steady, comforting rhythm. "The visitor," I said, was unconvinced. He saw only the suffering, the corruption, the shadows twisting through the narrow streets. Batman remained silent, though his eyes had dimmed into a thoughtful calm, the expression of a man who knows shadows well and has walked through them more nights than most can imagine. "But the Keeper," I continued, "placed his hand against one of these very walls and told him that the stone did not lament its cracks. It welcomed them as memories of how the city found its way." A slow breath escaped Batman, quiet and steady. "What happened next?" he asked, his voice gentle as though unwilling to disturb the hush of the chamber. I brushed a hand along the scroll, letting my fingers follow the graceful ink strokes. "The visitor asked if the city could change." Batman's gaze lifted, and though the mask hid his expression, something softened in the air. A quiet vulnerability, rare and fleeting yet unmistakable. "The Keeper wrote," I whispered, "that Gotham changes every time someone chooses to carry its burdens with kindness instead of fear." Batman inhaled slowly, the sound blending seamlessly with the faint hum of the gears and the rain's delicate tapping. His jaw tightened, not in anger but in a kind of still reverence. "People rarely think Gotham softens," he murmured. "People rarely look long enough," I replied. We let the scroll rest between us, its parchment glowing gently beneath the lantern's warm radiance. Outside, the storm deepened into quiet mist. Inside, the tower held us close, two keepers of the night, listening to the heartbeat of a city that whispered through stone, through rain, through memory. And in that tranquil moment, the silence between us felt as vast and gentle as the hush of an old archive turning another page. For a moment we remained there, standing beside the unrolled scroll as if caught within the soft breath of the tower itself. The storm outside had quieted into a gentle, rhythmic whisper, its rain drifting down the windows like delicate strands of silver thread. The gears above us turned slowly, their muted click steady as a heartbeat. Batman let his gaze linger on the final lines of the scroll, his posture still, yet softened in a way that the world below would never be permitted to witness. There are moments, rare and quiet, when even the most resolute figures allow themselves the grace of contemplation, and I felt, in the hush of that chamber, that this was one of them. At last he spoke, his voice low and grounded. The keeper understood Gotham better than most who try to rule it. I smiled faintly. Understanding does not come from positions of power, I murmured. It grows from listening to the spaces between things, the cracks, the silences, the forgotten corners. Batman's eyes shifted toward me, a quiet, wordless acknowledgement that such wisdom resonated with something long held and deeply familiar within him. I carefully rolled the scroll and tied the faded blue ribbon back into place, restoring it to its small alcove with the same tenderness one might use to lay a cherished memory to rest again. "Come," I whispered. "There is one final place the keeper wrote of." Batman followed as we walked deeper still into the rear of the chamber. The air cooled slightly, carrying with it the scent of chalky stone and the faintest aroma of old quill ink, a fragrance that lingers only in rooms touched by centuries of writing. We approached a narrow archway, nearly hidden behind a stack of wooden crates. The archway led into the smallest room in the tower, a circular alcove no larger than a modest reading nook. A single wooden chair sat beside a pedestal that held a stone-bound ledger, its cover marked only by a simple symbol, a small circle with a line crossing through it, like the hand of a clock frozen at midnight. Batman paused as we stepped inside, his bootfalls soft against the thin layer of dust that coated the stone floor. The room felt different from the others, not heavier, not haunted, but intimate, as though it held a memory still warm from the touch of the one who left it behind. "This was the keeper's final desk," I said quietly. "He wrote here until the very last night recorded in these archives." Batman approached the pedestal and leaned slightly closer. The lantern's glow drifted across the ledger's cover, illuminating faint patterns etched into the stone. Patterns so worn they resembled ripples left in sand after the tide's retreat. "Does it open?" he asked softly. "With respect," I replied, and lifted the cover with slow, deliberate care. The stone hinge moved silently, as though it remembered being opened often by gentle hands. Inside, the first page held a line written in more delicate strokes than the earlier entries, as though the keeper, older now, had taken care to write slowly. "It begins," I whispered, "with the night after the visitor left." Batman stood close enough now that his shadow fell across the page, yet he did nothing to obstruct the lantern's glow. The text read, "The man cloaked in shadow returned to the world below, but the tower felt his absence as one feels the settling of dust after a restless dream." Batman inhaled slowly, his chest rising in a steady arc. I turned the page, and the parchment shifted with a delicate sigh, as though preparing itself to release long-held memory. The next entry described how the keeper continued his nightly walks through the tower's halls. He listened to the rain. He tended the gears. He catalogued new arrivals and polished the brass fittings that lined the stairwells. But the tower, he said, felt different, as if awakened by the presence of a man shaped by night. "Here," I murmured, pointing to a particular line near the middle of the page. Batman leaned closer, reading each word with the careful stillness of a scholar studying sacred text. The passage read, "In the quiet hours of the night, I heard the city breathe with him." Though he walks alone, he carries not just the darkness, but the hope that grows quietly in its shadow. A faint exhale escaped Batman. Not quite a sigh, yet deeply contemplative. His gloved hand rested lightly upon the edge of the pedestal, as though grounding himself against the weight of those old gentle words. Another page turned. The next entries were shorter, their handwriting growing thinner, more fragile, the ink strokes trembling slightly as the keeper's years grew long. Yet each entry held a warmth that felt timeless, a serenity born from a lifetime spent listening to quiet truths. One night's entry read, "I wonder if he will return, not to seek answers but to rest." There are few places where men shaped by burden may lay their silent thoughts upon the world and let them ease. Batman stood perfectly still, as though any movement might disturb the gentle hush that filled the small alcove. "I've never known Gotham to offer rest," he said softly. "It offers it here," I replied, "for those who know how to listen." The lantern's flame flickered, casting a warm ripple of gold across the stone walls. Outside, a fresh wave of rain slid across the tower's windows, its soft patter echoing in the hollow spaces above our heads. Batman looked back to the ledger. "Is there more?" "There is one final entry." I turned the page. The keeper's last words were written with extraordinary calm, a serenity that wrapped around the ink like a gentle embrace. They read, "Tonight I felt the tower breathe again, not with sorrow nor with longing, but with quiet readiness. For the one who will come after me has already begun his walk through the city's shadowed streets. He carries the silence well." Batman's breath deepened, and the lantern flame reflected softly in the edges of his cowl, warming the dark lines that framed his eyes. "He wasn't writing about me," Batman murmured, yet the words carried a note of tender uncertainty. "No," I said gently, "but he was writing for you." The gears above us turned, their soft, heavy click echoing like the final punctuation of a long, patient sentence. And in that quiet chamber, surrounded by stone and rain and the warm fragrance of old parchment, Batman and I stood side by side, two keepers of Gotham's memory, listening to a message carried across generations, waiting softly for the next page of the night to turn. We lingered in the keeper's alcove for a long while, as though the room itself had wrapped its quiet arms around us, and wished gently that we would not yet go. The lantern's glow drifted lazily across the stone walls, painting slow-moving halos of gold that shimmered with every faint breath of the tower's old drafts. The scent of parchment and cedar hung warmly in the air, interwoven with the distant perfume of rain-soaked moss clinging to the outer ledges. Batman stood beside me, silent as a figure carved from shadow, yet softened now by the gentle intimacy of a story written long before his time. A story that seemed somehow to have been waiting quietly for him to arrive. When at last he turned away from the keeper's final entry, his movement was deliberate, almost reverent, as though closing the ledger was akin to lowering the lid on a treasured memory. I closed it carefully, letting the stone cover settle with a muted, tender thud. It felt like the end of a chapter, whose final words still shimmered in the air around us, not fading but settling gently into the soft undercurrent of the night. "Come," I murmured, my voice little more than a warm thread of sound. "There is something else you may wish to see." Batman followed as I led him back into the main archive chamber, the circular room beneath the great clock face. The gears above us turned in their endless rhythm, each shifting tooth a slow metallic murmur, woven seamlessly into the hush of rain. Here I showed him the most unusual shelf in the entire tower, one not filled with scrolls or ledgers, but with small wooden boxes, each carefully labeled with a single date and an initial. "Are these records as well?" Batman asked, though his voice held the quiet curiosity of someone approaching a long-forgotten relic. "In a sense," I replied. "These are the Keeper's nightly reflections, short accounts, fragments of thought he kept not for the city, but for himself." Batman reached toward one box, then paused, a subtle hesitation, as though uncertain whether he had the right to touch something so deeply personal. I nodded gently, encouraging him. He lifted the lid from a box dated midwinter, long ago. Inside lay only a thin piece of folded parchment. He unfolded it slowly. The paper crackled softly, a delicate brittle sound, like a quiet breath in a vast library's stillness. The message inside was short, written with poetic simplicity. Tonight the city groaned under heavy clouds, yet somewhere beneath the weight a single lantern glowed. "It is enough." Batman stared at the words with a calm stillness that suggested the line struck deeper than he expected. "Not all hope," I whispered, "announces itself loudly." He folded the parchment carefully and returned it to the box. We explored more of the boxes, each containing a few lines that resembled poetry, or perhaps meditations that grew from nights spent alone with the sound of rain and the turning of gears. One read, "The city's breath is uneven tonight, but I have learned to listen to the gentle places between." Another, "A shadow passed the tower, though it did not enter. Still, I felt its purpose. Quiet, steady, unafraid." Batman's eyes lingered on that final word, unafraid. I could sense a soft shifting within him, like a long-held tension quietly easing, not entirely, but enough to let in a small, fragile warmth. "You said," Batman murmured, "that he wrote for those who would come after." "He did," I replied, "and perhaps more than he knew." A gentle silence settled over us, woven from the rain, the gears, the turning pages, and the faint aroma of old wood and warm earth. After a time, Batman spoke again. "What became of him?" "The Keeper." I ran my fingertips along the spine of a nearby ledger, feeling the shallow grooves left by centuries of hands. "He served for many decades," I said softly. "When at last he felt his time growing short, he wrote one final note, a message not about Gotham but about the tower itself." I led Batman to a drawer beneath the central table. Inside lay a small parchment, folded with precise care. When I opened it, the lantern's glow bathed the faded ink in warm gold. Batman read silently. "If the tower must sleep, let it rest in the hands of one who understands the quiet language of the night. For the city above has many guardians, but its silence belongs to only a few." Batman's gaze softened, the words resonating like a gentle chime. He looked up at me, his expression quiet, reflective. "You kept this place alive," he murmured. "And will, as long as the city breathes," I said. A faint warmth flickered behind the stern line of his cowl. Outside, the rain thickened once more, its soft drumming rolling gently down the clock tower walls. The city below shimmered beneath its watery veil, a place of endless stories, held together not by strength alone, but by the quiet perseverance of those who listened. Batman stepped closer to the great window, its glass glistening with slow-moving droplets. He rested one hand on the cold metal frame and looked out across the hazy rooftops. Gotham, in all its weary splendor, stretched before him, a patchwork of shadow and light, storm and solace, chaos and quiet resilience. "You see it differently," he said softly. "Not as broken, but as becoming. As all living things are, I whispered. Batman stood unmoving, gazing into the night as though he were tracing the faint, unseen heartbeat of the city he guarded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain, the gears, the faint rustle of parchment, they filled the silence with a gentle, comforting presence, like old friends sitting close without need for words. And in that stillness, the tower felt alive, breathing softly, patiently, waiting for whatever the next moment of the night would bring. Batman remained by the window for some time, his silhouette outlined gently against the pale shimmer of rain-washed glass. The storm's rhythm softened around us, its once steady drumming now drifting into a calmer sway, like the slow exhale of a weary sky settling into rest. The gears above continued their patient turning, each movement a soft metallic murmur that blended with the night as naturally as breath. The tower had grown warmer, its old stone holding the lantern's glow the way ancient hearths hold the last embers of a long evening fire. At length, Batman stepped back from the window and turned toward me. Not abruptly, but with a quiet deliberation that suggested he had found something in the view worth holding on to. "There's more to this place than anyone realizes," he said. "Most places are larger on the inside," I replied, "when we give them the time to reveal themselves." He seemed to consider that. A faint tension lifted from his shoulders, as if the tower's gentle silence had loosened some hidden knot he carried with him. I motioned for him to follow as I walked toward the oldest shelf in the room, a curved structure of oak, darkened with age and polished by the touch of countless hands. "This," I murmured, running my fingers along the smooth wooden edge, "was the Keeper's first collection. Long before ledgers, before nightly reflections, before the visitor ever came." Batman approached, his gaze attentive, quietly respectful. "What did he keep here?" he asked. "Fragments," I said softly. "Early drafts, personal musings, observations made when the tower was still new to his guardianship. I pulled one volume free, its spine frayed, its edges softened by years of gentle use. When I opened it, the scent of old parchment rose into the air, mingling with the warm aroma of cedar and moss that lived permanently within the tower's stones. The writing inside was smaller, younger, more tentative than in the later scrolls. Batman leaned over the page, reading the first lines silently. "Tonight I begin the task entrusted to me. The tower sleeps still, its halls unaccustomed to the rustle of record-keeping, but I sense it, listening." A soft breath escaped him, almost a sigh, but too calm, too soft to be burdened. "He wrote as though the tower were alive," Batman murmured. "In its own way," I said. "It is." Rain trickled gently along the outer stonework, its sound weaving seamlessly with the turning pages as I revealed more entries. A shadow passed the northern stairs, not threat, merely presence. Batman's eyes flickered subtly. Shadows were his domain, but here they were described with a tenderness that seemed to soothe rather than unsettle. Another entry described the Keeper learning the patterns of the gears, the music of their turning, the subtle notes that signaled weather shifting, or cracks forming, or simply the heartbeat of the tower as it aged. "The tower," I said quietly, "has always needed watchers who understood its quiet nature, people who listened more than they spoke." Batman's gaze lowered slightly. "No one listens in my line of work." "You do," I whispered, "even when you think you do not." The rain grew softer still, thinning into a faint patter like fingertips brushing against glass. Batman closed the book gently and returned it to the shelf. "Why show me all this?" he asked. "Because you came seeking answers to a question the Keeper asked long ago." He tilted his head, curiosity rising like the faint lift of a breeze. "What question?" I led him back toward the great table, where the lantern flickered softly upon maps, scrolls, and ledgers of every age. Then quietly, I recited the keeper's words. If the tower must sleep, let it rest in the hands of one who understands the quiet language of the night. Batman stood unmoving, the weight of the words settling around him like the gentle fold of a dark cloak. His voice came slowly. I'm not sure I understand the language of anything quiet. I smiled. You understand it better than most. You walk through shadows not to frighten, but to comfort. You listen where others rush. You wait where others demand. He said nothing, but a subtle warmth moved through the air between us, as though the tower itself recognized a truth spoken aloud. I gestured toward the winding staircase leading upward toward the room behind the great clock face. There is one more place I want you to see, I said. Batman followed, our footsteps soft against the ancient stone. As we ascended, the sound of gears grew louder, not harsh or mechanical, but organic, like an enormous heartbeat measured in steady, methodical ticks. A gentle draft swept past us, carrying with it the scent of rain and the cool breath of the upper tower. When we reached the top, Batman paused. Before us stretched the keeper's last vantage, a circular space just behind the massive clock hands, its glass glowing faintly with the reflections of 1,000 city lights. The rain streaked slowly down the translucent surface, turning Gotham's skyline into a dreamy watercolor of golds and blues and muted grays. It's beautiful from here, Batman whispered. Gotham always was, I said, when seen from a place that allows it to rest. Batman stepped closer to the glass, his reflection blending with the blurred lights outside, making him appear half shadow, half quiet guardian. People would sleep easier, he murmured, if they saw it this way. People will, I said softly, because someone will hold this view for them. He lowered his gaze, a contemplative quiet moving through him like a tide. Behind us, the gears continued their rhythm, steady, patient, like the pulse of a city that knew it was watched with care. Outside, thunder rolled far away, not sharp, not urgent, but distant and softened, as though even the storm had grown weary and wished only to rest. Batman turned toward me. And what did the keeper say in his very first lesson? I smiled gently. That night teaches what daylight forgets, I said, and that silence often knows more truth than sound. Batman inhaled slowly, his breath steady, as though he were drawing the quiet strength of the tower into himself. In the dim glow of the lantern-lighted chamber, he looked less like Gotham's relentless protector and more like a man who had finally found a place where the night did not ask him to be unbreakable. Just still, just present, just breathing. And the tower, ancient and patient, listened to him in return. Batman stood quietly before the great clock face, its translucent surface glowing softly as the lantern's warm light mingled with the blurred shimmer of Gotham's distant lights. Rain traced slow wandering paths down the glass, thin silver lines that caught the soft radiance as if the sky were sketching gentle runes upon the tower for our eyes alone. Behind us, the gears turned with their perpetual grace, each movement calm, unhurried, steady as a deep breath. The sound was soothing, a soft rhythmic murmur echoing faintly through the hollow spaces of the old stone. Batman rested one hand upon the metal frame of the clock, his gloved fingers glistening slightly with the faint moisture that drifted inward through the old seams of the tower. "It's quieter here," he murmured, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "The tower likes you," I said gently. "It doesn't open to everyone, not like this." He turned slightly, the faintest motion of curiosity. "Why?" "Because," I said, "you do not fear the quiet. You walk with it. You carry it. You honor it even when it feels heavy." Batman lowered his gaze to the city below, a landscape of rooftops glistening beneath the rain, chimneys exhaling thin spirals of mist, windows glowing with dim amber warmth as people settled into their late-night routines. Gotham, in all its imperfections, looked peaceful from here, a sleeping giant wrapped in soft grey fog and silver rainfall. "It never looks like this from the streets," he whispered. "No," I replied. "Streets show the steps, heights show the journey." The rain softened once more, its rhythm falling into a slow, meditative cadence, a hush layered upon hush, until even the storm seemed to drift toward sleep. I walked to a small wooden bench positioned along the curved wall and brushed away a fine layer of dust from its surface. "This was the keeper's final seat," I said softly. "He would sit here for hours, listening to the city breathe, writing his reflections with nothing but candlelight and the lull of gears to keep him company." Batman approached the bench and studied its aged grain, his expression contemplative. He did not sit, yet he seemed to sense the history lingering in its quiet presence, a history built from stillness, patience, and gentle observation. "Do you ever write?" I asked. He shook his head slightly. "I record things, memories, clues, patterns, but not like this." "You might," I murmured. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his gaze back to the great window, watching the rain's slow descent, the faint flicker of lightning far beyond the city's horizon, and the drifting mist rising from the Gothic rooftops. The moment stretched softly between us, calm, thoughtful, unbroken. At last he spoke. "What did the keeper hope for?" he asked. "After all his years alone with the night?" I smiled quietly. He hoped only that someone would continue listening. Not for him, but for Gotham. Batman absorbed the words with a slow breath, as though drawing them deep into his chest. "You already do that," I added. "Every night you walk the city, you listen to its unspoken fears, you watch its quiet corners, you carry its weight not because you must, but because you choose to." For a moment, the only sound was the rain sliding softly against the glass. Then Batman turned toward me, and though his face remained hidden behind the dark lines of the cowl, his posture shifted, subtly, yet unmistakably. It was the posture of someone who had found a rare stillness inside himself. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the soft gravity of something seldom spoken aloud. "You're welcome," I whispered. He looked back toward the stairwell, but made no move to leave. Instead, he stood quietly, as though savoring one final breath of the tower's serenity, before returning to the world below. After a while, he spoke again, a faint murmur woven gently into the hush of gears and rain. "If I ever need to return, will the tower let me in?" I smiled, feeling the warmth in the old stones around us. "It already has," I said, "and it will again. The night remembers those who walk it kindly." He gave the smallest nod, a gesture so subtle most would have missed it, but in this quiet place it felt as meaningful as a spoken vow. He stepped toward the stairs, his cape brushing softly against the stone floor, its movement gliding like calm water in a gentle current. The gears hummed overhead, patient and unending. The lantern flickered, its flame dimming as though preparing to sleep, and the rain, soft and persistent, fell upon the city in long silver threads. Before he descended the stairs, Batman paused one last time. "You keep the tower," he said. "And you keep the night," I answered. No further words were needed. He disappeared down the steps with steady, unhurried strides, each footfall absorbed into the soft murmur of the tower's breath. I remained a while longer, watching the rain drift lazily down the glass, listening to the faint crackle of a dying ember in the small iron grate nearby, and savoring the scent of damp stone and parchment mingling gently in the air. Gotham exhaled beneath me, a great somber lullaby sung through rain and shadow and distant wind. And as the night deepened, its rhythm softened, fading into a tranquil stillness that wrapped itself around the tower like a warm, velvety cloak. Under that quiet veil, with the city resting, with the tower listening, with the gears turning in their eternal patient cadence, I felt the Keeper's final lesson settle gently into the silence. That some guardians save the city with strength, and others with quiet watchfulness, and both in their own way are necessary for the night to breathe. The storm softened to the faintest whisper. The lantern dimmed into a golden ember. And the tower, ancient and steady, waited calmly for dawn's first pale touch, or for the next traveler who might seek refuge in its peaceful silence. Here, in the heart of Gotham's night, the world became quiet and warm and endlessly gentle, just as all good stories should drift into rest.